Okay, so now that we've got our face shapes, we're going to go ahead and measure the facial features. So I'll start with this character on the bottom left. And the way that I normally do it, and I don't know if there's an exact right or wrong way because facial features are so different from person to person, but a line down the middle of the face and a line approximately halfway through the middle of the head. And then halfway from this line to the chin, approximately again, and halfway from there to there again, approximately as the mouth. And the reason why I say approximately is because we all have very different proportions, and even the expressions on the face can tend to move these around a bit. These are just general guidelines to get you started. So the distance between the eyes is generally the width of one eye, something like that. The distance between the eyes is generally the width of the nose, and the distance from pupil to pupil can generally be said to be where the mouth is placed. Other rules that can apply that I'll oftentimes find myself doing just naturally is you can draw different shapes into the positioning like this, like a kind of an offset triangle for the nose. So you can kind of find these shapes that you're used to putting into your form. That also helps you measure to get things in place quicker. So a downward shaped moon there, a couple moon shapes for the brow with a reverse moon shape there. So although these aren't exactly measuring tools, they still work in that same fashion because it helps you to place some of your facial features. And once you start learning these shapes that are consistent in the face, your placement and your overall design of your character becomes a lot easier. Other things to keep in mind, the bottom of the ears is oftentimes lines up with the bottom of the nose, a little bit past sometimes. Top of the ears can be just above the eyes. Now the other thing to keep in mind with this is that when the head rotates, if the head rotates back, the ears will appear lower on the form of the head, and if the head rotates down, the opposite will occur. So you got to remember that the ears, just think of it in terms of you have this head shape. We're looking at it from the side. You have a wedge off the bottom, and you have the ears here. Well, as this rotates, the jawline will come up. The head will recede back into space, and that will give the appearance that the ears are lower. So kind of think of the ears almost as a pivot point. And, it's also good to keep that in mind because of the way the neck kind of reacts off that area. So little rules like that, if you remember those, it'll go a long ways into helping you figure out your characters. So say that we've got the middle of the head here, halfway down from here to here, halfway down from here to here. And those are just our guidelines. And then we start to place in some of the facial features. So with that guideline, that base, it becomes a lot easier to just worry about, all right, how do I want these eyes to look? What kind of expression does this character have? I don't have to think about, as I'm drawing them now, I don't have to think about their placement any longer. I've done that, and I could just think about the design of the facial features. Obviously, if they have a certain kind of smile or a lack of smile, that's going to distort and change the positioning of the features as well. Nothing is set in stone, so always be very open to moving your stuff around. As you feel comfortable, erase some of your construction lines. At this stage, I would also say place your lines very carefully, and not even so much carefully, but just relaxed. It could be messy. Messy's fine. Sometimes messy works really well. But just relaxed and kind of experimental. You don't have to be so... You don't want to tense up at this stage of your artwork. In fact, I would say that you don't want to tense up probably at all. But if you're going to tense up at the finish work, do that right at the very end and then tighten up your lines, that kind of thing. But stay loose and fluid with the design of your character. And now another good rule for the eyes, I used to always draw the pupils first, and I would always get these kind of offset, funny looking eyes. Something to keep in mind is that the distance, the eye part of the eye is basically 1/3 of the overall eye. I'm sorry I'm not using the technical term there, or the proper terminology, I should say. But if you just consider that it's about 1/3 of the overall eye like that, you'll generally get a pretty decent look. And then it's a lot easier to just fill in the pupil after you've done that. Now if you notice too, I've also got my resolution very low. I like doing that for the initial sketch. It allows me to feel more like I'm using a pencil on paper. So I just kind of use it to be a little bit more rough, again, in my design stage. Okay, so there's the placement of the facial features. I can now take that and clean it up, either soft erase the head down, create a new layer, and draw over top and really refine. But you know, I've got my base foundation of what I wanted the character to look like. Okay, so now to place the facial features on the female character. Let's go ahead and zoom in here. And the first thing I do again is to place a line down the middle of the face, and the halfway point from the top of the head to the chin, approximately, that'll be the guideline for our eyes. Halfway from there to the chin will be the guideline to the nose, and halfway from the nose to the chin, approximately, will be the mouth. The distance from the eyes, whatever size we determine, generally will be the space of one eye. So we'll say something like this. The nose shape, something to keep in mind when placing the nose is to always draw the nostrils unless the head is at a really steep downward turn angle. It's real easy to get in the habit of drawing a nose like this. It's, you know, obviously easier to do, but it's not accurate. And even though I did it on the male character over here. But it's, if you start studying faces, the more you'll notice is that you almost always see a bit of the nostrils. And again, unless the head is downward tilted pretty far, so from a side angle, I would picture something pretty extreme, like so. Then obviously you're not going to see the nostrils when the head's tilted that far down. So study your reference, and I'm sure you'll see what I'm explaining there. Okay, so there's the placement of the nose. A good thing to keep in mind when drawing the mouth is if the mouth is going to be open, I recommend drawing that first. I'm going to do a slight opening here, but I'm not going to do like a screaming pose or a yelling pose. It'll be relatively basic for this particular one. But the thing to keep in mind is that it sometimes becomes easier to draw that open mouth pose first and then place the other facial features. Now, since we're working digitally, it's not that big of a deal, because one of the beauties obviously of digital is that we can edit and move our work around pretty seamless with the design process. So as I draw on the mouth here with, just like I said, a slight opening, it's placing decently enough. We'll get the rest of the face in, and then if I've got to move things around, I'll show you. It's pretty easy to do, obviously. Now, the other thing is to always make sure that the top lip is just a little bit thinner than the bottom lip, except for, of course, those supermodels that are either born just with a lot larger top lip or enjoy collagen injections. I'm not sure, but for the most part, most people have a smaller top lip. But that is subjective to maybe your style and, you know, what type of characters you like to draw. Now for the eyes, I generally do a basic rounded kind of moon shape for the top and bottom like this, just to kind of get them into place. You know, always keep in mind that you don't have to draw this stuff in perfect the first time. So sometimes it's just it's good just to get a placeholder in your work. So I throw in these pretty lazy looking eyes, excuse me, and then I can add to those. Get the eyebrows in there. The eyebrows I just do is kind of this half turned moon shape again, like that. And then now I can modify those. I can take my selection tool here, and the thing that looks inaccurate to me is they seem tilted downward too much, almost as if she's sad or tired or something like that. So that's a little bit better. Now I can soft erase that. And kind of refine that a bit now. But not a lot. I'm still in the sketch phase of my drawing, and I just want to get a few more things accurate about it, but I'm not rendering yet. I'm not doing my detail work yet. It's important to realize when you're doing what and to keep those separated, because a lot of times you can go a little bit too quick with your design process and go right to rendering. And to me, all the nice line work in the world and all the cool fancy cross hatching or whatever you like to do isn't going to bode well over bad line work or a bad foundation. So you've got to spend that time in the design process, and that's where you're roughing out your concept like we're doing here. Still trying to figure out maybe what this character looks like, what her features are. You know, another thing to keep in mind when doing features like this on a woman or any character really is if you have too much line work, like if I start adding, you know, this line and this line and this line, you start adding age. So we'll talk more about that too as well as we define some other characters. So you can see those proportions that we talked about are working, you know, pretty well here. We're getting everything in place. Again, the distance of the eye, generally the iris portion is 1/3 of the overall eye. And I like to draw in the bigger rounded shapes, or the rounded shape of the iris, and then come back and place the pupil. And sometimes I have a little bit of trouble even doing it that way. But we'll get there, no worries. And obviously the big heavy eyelashes to help define and shape the eye. Again, we always do that a little bit thicker on the top, thinner on the bottom, kind of like the same rule with the lips. A little glint off to the one side of the eye like that. And always draw a shadow from the top eyelid. Okay, so there's our rough of the female face with the placement of her facial features. So that'll complete this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to clean up our line work a bit more, render out the characters, and give them some hair. So stay tuned.